Welcome everyone to the Savitri, the bi-monthly Savitri Circle on Infinite Conversations. We are resuming, but backing up a little bit, starting on page 34 in the canto, The Yoga of the King, The Yoga of the Soul's Release, Book 1, Canto 3. And we'll start with a brief meditation.
This is in the middle of Book 1, the Book of Beginnings, Canto 3, The Yoga of the Soul's Release. Only a while, at first, these heavenlier states, these large, wide-poised upliftings could endure. The high and luminous tension breaks too soon. The body's stone stillness and the life's hushed trance, the breathless might and calm of silent mind. Or slowly they fail as sets a golden day. The restless nether members tire of peace. A nostalgia of old little works and joys. A need to call back small familiar selves. To tread the accustomed and inferior way. The need to rest in a natural pose of fall. As a child who learns to walk can walk not long, replace the Titan will forever to climb. On the heart's altar dim the sacred fire. An old pull of subconscious chords renews. It draws the unwilling spirit from the heights, or a dull gravitation drags us down to the blind-driven inertia of our base. This, too, the supreme diplomat can use. He makes our fall a means for greater rise. For into ignorant nature's gusty field, into the half-ordered chaos of mortal life, the formless power, the self of eternal light, follows in the shadow of the Spirit's descent. The twin duality, forever one, chooses its home mid the tumults of the sense.
He comes unseen into our darker parts, and curtained by the darkness does his work, a subtle and all-knowing guest and guide, till they too feel the need and will to change. All here must learn to obey a higher law. Our body's cells must hold the immortal's flame. Else would the spirit reach alone its source, leaving a half-saved world to its dubious fate. Nature would ever labor unredeemed. Our earth would ever spin unhelped in space, and this immense creation's purpose fail, till at last the frustrate universe sank undone. Even his godlike strength to rise must fall. His greater consciousness withdrew behind. Dim and eclipsed, his human outside strove to feel again the old sublimities, bring the high saving touch, the eternal flame, the ethereal flame, call back to its dire need the divine force. Always the power poured back like sudden rain, or slowly in his breast a presence grew. It clambered back to some remembered height, or soared above the peak from which it fell. Each time he rose, there was a larger poise, a dwelling on a higher spirit plane. The light remained in him a longer space. In this oscillation between earth and heaven, in this ineffable communion's climb, there grew in him, as grows a waxing moon, the glory of the integer of his soul. A union of the real with the unique, a gaze of the alone from every face, the presence of the eternal in the hours, widening the mortal mind's half-look on things, bridging the gap between man's force and fate, made whole the fragment being we are here.
At last was won a firm spiritual poise, a constant lodging in the eternal's realm, a safety in the silence, and the ray, a settlement in the immutable. His heights of being lived in the still self. His mind could rest on a supernal ground and look down on the magic and the play where the God-child lies in the lap of night and dawn, and the everlasting puts on time's disguise. To the still heights and to the troubled depths, his equal spirit gave its vast ascent. a poised serenity of tranquil strength, a wide, unshaken look on time's unrest, faced all experience with unaltered peace. Indifferent to the soil and delight, untempted by the marvel and the call, immobile, it beheld the flux of things, calm and apart, supported all that is. His spirit stillness helped the toiling world. Inspired by silence and the closed eyes' sight, his force could work with a new luminous art on the crude material from which all is made, and the refusal of inertia's mass and the grey front of the world's ignorance and nescient matter, and the huge error of life. As a sculptor chisels a deity out of stone, he slowly chipped off the dark envelope, line of defense of nature's ignorance, the illusion and mystery of the inconscient, in whose black pall the eternal wraps his head, that he may act unknown in cosmic time. A splendor of self-creation from the peaks, a transfiguration in the mystic depths, a happier cosmic working could begin and fashion the world shape in him anew. God found in nature, nature fulfilled in God.
Already in him was seen that task of power. Life made its home on the high tops of self. His soul, mind, heart became a single sun. Only life's lotus remained dim. But there too, in the uncertain shadow of life, there was a labor and a fiery breath. The ambiguous, cowled, celestial puissance worked, watched by the inner witness's moveless peace. Even on the struggling nature left below, strong periods of illumination came. Lightnings of glory after glory burned. Experience was a tale of blaze and fire. Air rippled round the argosies of the gods. Strange riches sailed to him from the unseen. Splendors of insight filled the blank of thought. Knowledge spoke the inconscient stillnesses. Rivers poured down of bliss and luminous force. Visits of beauty, storm sweeps of delight rained from the all-powerful mystery above. Thence stooped the eagles of omniscience. A dense veil was rent, a mighty whisper heard. Repeated in the privacy of his soul, a wisdom cry from rapt transcendences sang on the mountains of an unseen world. The voices that an inner listening hears conveyed to him their prophet utterances, and flame-wrapped outbursts of the immortal word and flashes of an occult revealing light approached him from the unreachable secrecy. Inspired knowledge sat enthroned within, whose seconds illumined more than reason's years. An ictus of revealing luster fell, as if a pointing accent upon truth. And like a sky flare, showing all the ground, a swift, intuitive discernment shown.
One glance could separate the true and false, or raise its rapid torch fire in the dark to check the claimants crowding through mind's gates, covered by the forged signatures of the gods, detect the magic bride in her disguise, or scan the apparent face of thought and life. Oft inspiration with her lightning feet, a sudden messenger from the all-seeing tops, traversed the soundless corridors of his mind, bringing her rhythmic sense of hidden things. A music spoke, transcending mortal speech, as if from a golden vial of the all bliss, a joy of light, a joy of sudden sight, a rapture of the thrilled, undying word poured into his heart as into an empty cup, a repetition of God's first delight, creating in a young and virgin time. In a brief moment, caught a little space, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts, lodged in the expectant stillness of his depths, a crystal of the ultimate absolute, a portion of the inexpressible truth, revealed by silence to the silent soul. The intense creatrix in his stillness wrought. Her power, fallen speechless, grew more intimate. She looked upon the seen and the unforeseen. Unguessed domains she made her native field. All vision gathered into a single ray, as when the eyes stare at an invisible point, till through the intensity of one luminous spot, an apocalypse of a world of images enters into the kingdom of the seer. A great nude arm of splendor suddenly rose. It rent the gauze opaque of nescience. Her lifted fingers keen, unthinkable tip, bared with a stab of flame the closed beyond.
An eye awakes in voiceless heights of trance, a mind plucking at the unimaginable, overleaping with a soul and perilous bound, the high black wall hiding superconscience. She broke in with inspired speech for scythe, and plundered the unknowable's vast estate, a gleaner of infinitesimal grains of truth, a sheaf binder of infinite experience. She pierced the guarded mysteries of world force, and her magic methods wrapped in 1,000 veils. Or she gathered the lost secrets dropped by time in the dust and crannies of his mounting route, mid old forsaken dreams of hastening mind and buried remnants of forgotten space. A traveler between summit and abyss, she joined the distant ends, the viewless deeps, or streaked along the roads of heaven and hell, pursuing all knowledge like a questing hound. A reporter and scribe of hidden wisdom talk, her shining minutes of celestial speech passed through the masked office of the occult mind, transmitting gave to prophet and to seer the inspired body of the mystic truth. A recorder of the inquiry of the gods, spokesman of the silent seeings of the Supreme, she brought immortal words to mortal men. Above the reason's brilliant, slender curve, released like radiant air dimming a moon, broad spaces of a vision without line or limit swam into his spirit's ken. Oceans of being met his voyaging soul, calling to infinite discovery. Timeless domains of joy and absolute power stretched out, surrounded by the eternal hush. The ways that lead to endless happiness ran like dream smiles through meditating vasts. Disclosed stood up in a gold moment's blaze, white sun steps in the pathless infinite.
Along a naked curve in bornless self, the points that run through the closed heart of things shadowed the indeterminable line that carries the everlasting through the years. The magician order of the cosmic mind, coercing the freedom of infinity with a stark array of nature's symbol facts and life's incessant signals of event, transmuted chance recurrences into laws, a chaos of signs into a universe. Out of the rich wonders and the intricate whirls of the spirit's dance with matter as its mask, the balance of the world's design grew clear. Its symmetry of self-arranged effects, managed in the deep perspectives of the soul and the realism of its elusive art, its logic of infinite intelligence, its magic of a changing eternity. A glimpse was caught of things forever unknown. The letters stood out of the unmoving word. In the immutable, nameless origin was seen emerging as from fathomless seas the trail of the ideas that made the world, and sown in the black earth of nature's trance, the seed of the spirit's blind and huge desire, from which the tree of cosmos was conceived, and spread its magic arms through a dream of space. Immense realities took on a shape. There looked out from the shadow of the unknown, the bodiless namelessness that saw God born and tries to gain from the mortal's mind and soul a deathless body and a divine name. The immobile lips, the great surreal wings, the visage masked by superconscient sleep, the eyes with their closed lids that see all things, appeared of the architect who builds in trance.
The original desire, born in the void, peered out. He saw the hope that never sleeps, the feet that run behind a fleeting fate, the ineffable meaning of the endless dream. Hardly for a moment glimpsed, viewless to mind, as if a torch held by a power of God, the radiant world of the everlasting truth glimmered like a faint star bordering the night above the golden overmine's shimmering ridge. Even were caught as through a cunning veil the smile of love that sanctions the long game, the calm indulgence and maternal breasts of wisdom suckling the child laughter of chance, silence, the nurse of the Almighty's power, the omniscient hush, womb of the immortal word, and of the timeless, the still broadening face, and the creative eye of eternity. The inspiring goddess entered a mortal's breast, made there her study of divining thought and sanctuary of prophetic speech, and sat upon the tripod seat of mind. All was made wide above, all lit below. In darkness core, she dug out wells of light. On the undiscovered depths, imposed a form, lent a vibrant cry to the unuttered vasts, and through great shoreless, voiceless, starless breaths, bore earthward fragments of revealing thought, hewn from the silence of the ineffable. A voice in the heart uttered the unspoken name, a dream of seeking thought, wandering through space, entered the invisible and forbidden house. The treasure was found of a supernal day.
In the deep subconscient glowed her jewel lamp. Lifted, it showed the riches of the cave where, by the miser traffickers of sense unused, guarded beneath night's dragon paws, in folds of velvet darkness draped, they sleep, whose priceless value could have saved the world. A darkness carrying warning in its breast looked for the eternal, wide, returning gleam, awaiting the advent of a larger ray and rescue of the lost herds of the sun. In a splendid extravagance of the waste of God, dropped carelessly in creation's spendthrift work, left in the chantiers of the bottomless world and stolen by the robbers of the deep, the golden shekels of the eternal lie, hoarded from touch and view and thought's desire, locked in blind anters of the ignorant flood, lest men should find them and be even as gods. A vision lightened on the viewless heights, a wisdom illumined from the voiceless depths, a deeper interpretation greatened truth, a grand reversal of the night and day. All the world's values changed, heightening life's aim. A wiser word, a larger thought came in than what the slow labor of human mind can bring. A secret sense awoke that could perceive a presence and a greatness everywhere. The universe was not now this senseless whirl, borne round inert on an immense machine. It cast away its grandiose, lifeless front. A mechanism no more, or work of chance, but a living movement of the body of God. A spirit hid in forces and in forms was the spectator of the mobile scene. The beauty and the ceaseless miracle let in a glow of the unmanifest. The formless, everlasting moved in it, seeking its own perfect form in souls and things.
Life kept no more a dull and meaningless shape. In the struggle and upheaval of the world, he saw the labor of a Godhead's birth, a secret knowledge masked as ignorance, fate covered with an unseen necessity, the game of chance of an omnipotent will. A glory and a rapture and a charm, the all-blissful sat, unknown within the heart. Earth's pains were the ransom of its prisoned delight. A glad communion tinged the passing hours. The days were travelers on a destined road, the nights companions of his musing spirit. A heavenly impetus quickened all his breast. The trudge of time changed into a splendid march. The divine dwarf towered to unconquered worlds. Earth grew too narrow for his victory. Once only, registering the heavy tread of a blind power on human littleness, life now became a sure approach to God, existence, a divine experiment, and cosmos, the soul's opportunity. The world was a conception and a birth of spirit in matter into living forms, and nature bore the immortal in her womb, that she might climb through him to eternal life. His being lay down in bright, immobile peace and bathed in wells of pure spiritual light. It wandered in wide fields of wisdom's self, lit by the rays of an everlasting sun. Even his body's subtle self within could raise the earthly parts towards higher things and feel on it the breath of heavenlier air. Already it journeyed towards divinity, upbuoyed upon winged winds of rapid joy, upheld to a light it could not always hold. It left mind's distance from the truth supreme and lost life's incapacity for bliss. All now suppressed in us began to emerge.
Thus came his soul's release from ignorance, his mind and body's first spiritual change. A wide God knowledge poured down from above, a new world knowledge broadened from within. His daily thoughts looked up to the true and one. His commonest doings welled from an inner light, awakened to the lines that nature hides, attuned to her movements that exceed our ken. He grew one with a covert universe. His grasp surprised her mightiest energies' springs. He spoke with the unknown guardians of the worlds. Forms he decried our mortal eyes see not. His wide eyes bodied viewless entities. He saw the cosmic forces at their work and felt the occult impulse behind man's will. Time's secrets were to him an oft-read book. The records of the future and the past outlined their excerpts on the etheric page. One and harmonious by the Maker's skill, the human in him paced with the divine. His acts betrayed not the interior flame. This forged the greatness of his front to earth. A genius heightened in his body's cells that knew the meaning of his fate-hedged works, akin to the march of unaccomplished powers beyond life's arc in spirit's immensities. Apart he lived in his mind's solitude, a demigod shaping the lives of men. One soul's ambition lifted up the race. A power worked, but none knew whence it came. The universal strengths were linked with his, filling earth's smallness with their boundless breadths. He drew the energies that transmute an age. Immeasurable by the common look, he made great dreams a mold for coming things, and cast his deeds like bronze to front the years. His walk through time outstripped the human stride. Lonely his days, and splendid like the sun's. End of Canto 3.
it really, really impresses me that he wrote this as he expounded the majority of this as the world was at war, where most people like today and the onset of the Anthropocene, the seeming breakdown and loss of species, everyone going to apocalyptic states. Here's Sri Aurobindo writing all his major works during World War One and during World War II, all the seeming breakdown, and he's seeing all of that, saying it's nature doing her thing, and just pointing us to our soul and to the divine. It's just so beautiful. This section is so entirely Vedic. Also, I've had a group that meets weekly, looking deeply at the secret of the Veda and hymns to the mystic fire, chanting and digging at the spiritual significance of all the gods, and they're all in this section. He doesn't name them, but I've written them in the column. I can count like 15 or so. It's pretty impressive how he's just changing the language of the Veda to deliver it to us without needing to know the Veda. It's really beautiful. And the deeper I look at the Rig Veda, the more cross connections start getting made.
Matteo, could you give an example of a cross connection?
Yeah. Anytime he says cave with a capital, this is Vala. This is the personification of the subconscious, and the herds of light. This is Surya, Savitri. This is the different formations of the dawn, physical, back to the dawn, physical Usha, the physical light. But it takes on all these different forms. There's different types of intuitive mind. One is revealing thought, and the goddess that rules this is Ila. I could definitely go on. I don't want to confuse the points here. But of course, Agni is mentioned all over the place in fire, and Indra is mentioned all over the place in illumined mind. And Vritra is the personification of the inconscient. Yeah, and there's a lot more, but that's just kind of, these are all connections with this is why if anyone's heard this Savitri called the fifth Veda, this is why. It's there's some sections that are incredibly Vedic. If we look at sort of around line 715 or so on page 42, this is the cow in the Angiras legend, waiting the advent of a larger array and rescue of the lost herds of the sun. This term Gautama, right? Gautama Buddha, whatever, go in that is both cow and light. So when the Vedas talking about herds of the sun, it's not cows coming down, but it's divine light pouring on us. And that's where the lost herds come in. Oh, it's so beautiful.
That's probably why cows have been sacred in India forever. They were a symbol of the light. And what is so beautiful about the cow, I have this little statue it's called the Nandi in India, of the sacred cow, and she's the placidity of the Divine Mother. She's just there, ready to feed the calf, chewing her cud, being completely at ease. And it's, for me, being a Taurus, a really wonderful image of the Divine Mother, of an aspect of the Divine Mother as the bringer of light, without any urgency, just here I am.
You know, I noticed that when I was in India, I would look at the bullocks pulling the carts, and there was this kind of infinite patience in there. And you look at a cattle, you know, out in a field or something here, and there's more like a kind of suspicion and caution there. It was really striking difference. And I mean, I didn't try to make any cultural sense of it. It's just what I saw.
So, the early part of what we read today has a perspective from he, and then it suddenly switches to she. I just want a little bit of help to understand that movement. I think I kind of understand it, but because I think the payoff is in the last section. It all sort of comes together at the end, but I just want a little bit of help with that movement of perspective.
I don't want to assume. Typically, generally, it's Ashwapati is the he. But what section are you referring to? Because I saw she pop up as a couple of different things.
Well,
We
the
could
only
general, but let's get
only a while at first these 70 states where we started. That was more he, and then when we got to oft inspiration with her lightning feet, all that section that follows is from perspective of she.
I think you'll find that that's inspiration that he's talking about, and he'll use the word inspire, or maybe inspiration, again through that. But I think that's what he's talking about here. He's talking about inspiration and using the she as a pronoun for it.
Okay.
And yes, John Robert, and the reason why it's she is because the form of intuitive mind that comes as inspiration is Saraswati. And that's why, like, to get really specific, that's why inspiration is she, because it's the goddess Saraswati.
Yeah.
And Savitri, or the Divine Mother, is the word, according to Sri Aurobindo, right? She's the bringer of the word. So as soon as he gets, as he starts to describe the enlightenment that's coming, he refers back to she, because she's coming.
And Sri Aurobindo says very explicitly on page 38, right after the break there, oft inspiration with her lightning feet.
Mm-hmm.
So there he names very explicitly what he's talking about. And a little bit later, he calls her the intense creatrix in that same page. And then he talks about her, at the last line, her lifted fingers keen, unthinkable tip. So.
And going back to that, I know that this is hard to remember back to, but with that chapter in Life Divine titled Brahman, Purusha, Ishwara, Maya, Prakriti, Shakti. I think I got it. The creatrix is Maya. When you see creatrix, that's Maya. When you see mediatrix, that's Prakriti. And God, I can't remember. Mediatrix might be Shakti. Creatrix, mediatrix, executrix. Executrix is Shakti. Mediatrix is Prakriti. Creatrix is Maya.
And then inspiration, was that Saraswati, is what you said?
The inspiration is Saraswati.
Okay.
Yeah. That's straight out, like I could quote that verbatim from Secret of the Veda.
Okay.
Chapter 4 in Secret of the Veda. Yeah, it's beautiful.
So the title of the canto is The Yoga of the Soul's Release. So I guess this...
The Yoga of the King, the Yoga of the Soul's Release.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, subtitle, yeah. So it's kind of a revelation of this yoga. Is that a fair way of describing it? That we're coming into a revelation of this way of thinking, working, understanding the world.
Well, we could say Sri Aurobindo talks about 3 transformations that happen in his yoga. And the first transformation is the transformation of the psychic being, or the psychic transformation. And that's the realization of the soul, realization of the personal divine. And that's what's going on with Ashwapati here. He's realizing his own being that's related to all these magnificent things he's seen. He's experiencing his own relation to that, his personal relation to that. And later on in the cantos, as we go forward, he will come in touch with some of these other revelations. But already you're seeing the second transformation that Sri Aurobindo talks about, which is the spiritual transformation, which is the descent of the divine that the individual soul's aspiration calls for. So there's all this inspiration and revelation that's coming to him as a result of him becoming aware of the being of his soul.
Thank you, that helps.
So in the beginning sections of this canto that we did not read today, there's an initial awakening, and on page 34, the very last line prior to the section we began reading today, there's the statement that he, Ashwapati, based his life upon eternity. But then the section that we began reading tells the story of a fall from that realization.
It's 12 o'clock.
And then the descent of the divine, of inspiration. And then what I understand from Matteo is that these different aspects of that descent have correspondences in Vedantic thought or in Hinduism.
Vedic thought.
Vedic thought. Okay. And yet the language here doesn't veils that. I think it seems to be in more universal terms, and even in some cross-cultural terms. Like if we see the word cave, that also could bring to mind to a Western reader Plato's allegory of the cave. And so what I understand is happening here is that there's a realization of the principle or of the existence of the eternal, and then there's a fall from that transcendental perception to a worldly embodied being that is part of this inconscience, is part of the ignorance. And there's a rising back to those states of transcendence, and then a falling back, a sort of up and down. And finally, it seems that there is a recognition that through the self's power alone, one cannot stabilize a integral being. This is not stated exactly in those terms, but there has to be this descent of inspiration. And part of what is happening with the self is that through dispelling all illusions, or through dispelling all notions of partial being, it opens itself to that inspiration coming to it. And then what we read in the latter parts of this section, this canto, is kind of like a celebration of that. It seems it's sort of like its culmination, and this new knowledge that's combined, this God knowledge combined with world knowledge, that it seems differentiates this soul. And this soul is also playing a role in larger processes, larger history, is what is this front of greatness, this forge the greatness of his front to earth. So that's where that's where kind of my comprehension, I guess, has landed, is that there's a kind of revelation, there's there's a joining of an ascending and a descending forces, and that this has now some historical manifestation. Like this soul's ambition lifted up the race, a power worked, but none knew whence it came. And then the universal strengths were linked with his, filling Earth's smallness with their boundless breadths. And he drew out the energies that transmute an age. So I think that's very interesting that it brings us to this like historical juncture, because I think that relates to what you were saying earlier about Aurobindo writing this in the throes of global crisis of the two world wars, and in a way like that hasn't really ended. Like we see it historically as two separate wars, but there are historical ways of looking at it that see it as one war. And in a way, we could take a larger vantage and see this whole emergence of the human catastrophe as part of the same process, as all part of one process. That, like I think you were saying, this soul is pointing beyond. It's pointing to what is what can be transmuted. What this can be transmuted into, perhaps. I'd be curious what you all think of that.
Marco, I'll respond a little bit to what you said, especially the part where you're bringing in the historical importance here. I was just last night looking at a YouTube video made by Devashish Banerjee, who's a professor at the CIIS. It was made in Oroville, and it was the main focus is a look at modernism and postmodernism through the lens of art. Devashish, I think, has a postgraduate degree in art or art history. And at the beginning of that talk, he goes through an outline of the different phases of modernism and postmodernism, starting with the Renaissance, and then the Enlightenment, and then the Industrial Revolution, and so on. And I think that would be looking at that. And Devashish has a really clear mental perspective about things. That would be one way you could look at all of these things that have been happening, originating in the West, actually originating in Europe, and then kind of spreading throughout the whole world. And that Sri Aurobindo was engaged with, and as you say, that engagement is not finished, and that whole process is not finished yet. I could send people the link to that if people would be interested.
I would like
it's
to
an hour-and-a-half talk.
I also I found your comments useful, Marco, because I'd been wondering about this expression in the poem, the huge era of life. So the grey front of the world's ignorance and nescient matter, and the huge era of life. So this, I guess, relates to the descent part of this movement, right? So, because I mean, it's not that I don't understand Aurobindo's relation there, because Aurobindo celebrates life and the incarnation of life, but he also has this sort of somewhat not exactly critical, but recognizing the other side of that incarnation. I think that's part, but I think it relates to what you were saying, Marco.
Well, life started unconscious, right? So that's the error right there, that there is this, as the divine immersed himself in matter, or herself in matter, that matter is by its nature unconscious. And so that's what we're coming out of. And I love this line here on page 42 near the end. which I think is the essence of the integral yoga, is it is, let's see. Anyway, there's this line, but a living movement of the body of God, that the body becomes a living conscious manifestation of that, of God, that's what it's all about. And we struggle out of a cave of our subconscious to get glimmers of light, and we get, I love that description, how we get sucked back into our comfort zone. Happens to me a lot. And then we somehow, and the reassurance that, let's see.
It's about 5 lines from the bottom of page 42, Andrea.
Oh yeah, I thought it was on 38. That, yeah, I know. Anyway, that works even when we are in those doldrums. It uses everything to bring the light in. That is very comforting to me.
Jeffrey, I can say that as we move forward with Ashapati's yoga, we're going to spend a lot of time in the realms of life. And then in those cantos, we will see all fully elaborated what Sri Aurobindo was talking about in that phrase, the era of life. And you're right, he both celebrates life and he recognizes the basically in our world, life lives by death. We continue to live by killing things and eating them. And our own death is the food for something else. So,
could you say that again?
Oh, I was talking about the era of life. Our life is sustained by death. I mean, life in our world, in the evolutionary world that we live in, is in this kind of unholy grasp, or anyway, it's in the grasp of death, because we live by killing things, by killing and eating things. That's how we unite with things in the physical sense. And so there's this really weird relationship between life and death. And Sri Aurobindo elaborates all of that in the cantos on life. There's about 4 or 5 of them. So we spend a lot of time with that.
Thank you.
And there's an adage from the Gita that he elaborates in essays on the Gita, simply, the eater eating is eaten. Marco, it was a really nice summary that you gave, and that sense of opening and having light pouring down, and then that followed by complete closure, and this is the yoga. I think that as the friction between those two things. That was a really nice summary, and to kind of position where we're at also, this is the first canto that starts Ashwapati's yoga, and then the next canto is the secret knowledge, and then it gets back to another canto called Yoga of the King, but it's the spirit's freedom and greatness, what John Robert was pointing to with the psychic realization, the soul's release, and then the spiritual. And that's the realization of the great cosmic spirit. But there's no sharp lines demarking any of this stuff. It's kind of all throughout. And the secret knowledge is pointed to. The next canto is pointed to in this canto on 43. A secret knowledge masked as ignorance, and not to spoil anything, but the secret knowledge points to realization of the transcendent and realization of the universal, realization of the individual Godhead. The Brahman is as considered as lodged within the individual being. and then the realization of the duality as oneness. It's those we'll see it and talk about it in the canto, but he's giving foreshadowing as far as just simple literary ploys. He's giving foreshadowing to what's coming up.
And I was wondering if one of you would like to venture into a kind of definition of yoga, because of course in the West one has a very odd idea of what yoga is.
It's simply, yeah. It's not, people think yoga, they think hatha yoga. They basically think the buxom blonde on the cliffs of California, wind blowing in her hair and stead in beautiful asanas, etc., etc. But it's simply union. Like that's what the word means, to be yoked to. But then there's like the question of union with what are we yoked to? And there's a whole bunch of conversation that could be had around that. And then the definition that Sri Aurobindo gives of yogic consciousness is really beautiful. He says the invisible force producing tangible results both inward and outward is the definition of yogic consciousness. The invisible force producing tangible results both inward and outward. So if we're whatever we're yoked to actually does that. You know, there's, even if if we're yoked to money, we see that people obsessed with money are yoked to money. It's producing tangible results both inward and outward. And Sri Aurobindo is pushing us to be yoked to the divine, yoked to the soul, rather than yoked to all the things that we tend to follow after here in this finite world. And I'm kind of quoting the Kena Upanishad through that, but it's all kind of pointed to. The Kena Upanishad starts off with these beautiful questions that point to yoga. By whom missioned falls the mind, shot to its mark, right? Kena in Sanskrit means by whom, and it starts with 4 by whom questions to point us to be yoked to the right forces. By whom missioned falls the mind, shot to its mark. By whom yoked, that's yoga, by whom yoked moves the first life breath forward on its path. By whom impelled is this word that men speak, what God set eye and ear to their working. It starts off with those questions and then really encourages us, kind of mantrically chants over and over again, to follow after the divine rather than what men choose to follow after here. Anyway, I hope that helps as far as yoga goes. It's not often what is conjured up by the word.
I had another little comment too. A little comment about little comments. So Aurobindo insists on the role of little things throughout this text that we read. A nostalgia of old little works and joys. Later on, he does, in a brief moment, caught a little space, all knowledge packed into great wordless thoughts. Several times throughout, he insists on the importance of the little parts of life. I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, but I thought it was interesting.
My thought about that, there's nothing too small for the divine to use for its purposes to bring us to that. There's nothing too small. Everything is useful in the yoga.
Mm.
Jeffrey, if you want to look up, there's a poem in Collected Poems of Sri Aurobindo. It's called In Horis Aeternum. In Horis, H-O-R-I-S, Aeternum. And it's about the nothing. It's about the nothings. in all these kind of momentary things, that is all. The nothing that is all. It's a magnificent poem. It's not a sonnet, but it's a little bit longer than a sonnet, but it's really something.
John Robert, you read my mind sometimes. That poem came to mind, and the sonnet, "The Infinitesimal Infinite," came to mind. Yeah, and lovely to point that out, Jeffrey. Thank you. It's all over Savitri, the little things. And nice, Andrea. That's when you were talking, it reminded me the title of that Arundhati Roy novel, The God of Small Things. I haven't read it, but I just love the title.
Yeah, you'll love to read it. It's wonderful.
There's a divine dwarf too in the poem. It's on page 43. In what happens here, it seems, is that the small becomes very large. It's almost like an Alice in Wonderland kind of thing. Specific lines are that a heavenly impetus quickened all his breast. The trudge of time changed to a splendid march. The divine dwarf towered to unconquerable worlds. Earth grew too narrow for his victory. So it's kind of like a supersizing sort of moment where even the earth is too small for the bigness that is sort of comes through the where the small and the descending meet, it seems, because it was just before then where the lines that Andrea had pointed out are there's a kind of a turning point where this presence and greatness descends, and this is the previous page. Aurobindo writes, "The universe was not now this senseless whirl, borne round inert on an immense machine. It cast away its grandiose, lifeless front." So interesting here that the grandiosity is the lifeless part. "A mechanism no more or work of chance, but a living movement of the body of God." And I think that's the line you were looking for earlier, Andrea.
Yeah.
From John, you made a comment about life eating life, and it brought to mind a story by Ursula K. Le Guin, called "Vaster Than Empires and More Slow." And it's about these space explorers, a crew, that finds a world that only has plant life. So it has no life, at least hypothetically in this fictional scenario, that where one being is eating another. It's all photosynthesis. But the world rejects these visitors. And there's a weird psychic stuff that happens, communication between species, and a kind of very dark thing that happens in the story. So that just came to mind. And there was something else too about, but I think it's probably slipped from my mind. So I think that's all I want to say.
Thanks, Marco. I'm always happy to hear Ursula Le Guin's name mentioned.
Does anybody want to say anything about the tripod seat of mind?
It's the mind of mind, the life of mind, and the matter, the physical, the matter of mind. I think it might have been John Robert. I can't remember. But if we think of mind, life, and body as also having all three of those aspects embedded in each other, so it's like a cross of 9, right? And it's actually more complex than that, but a simplified, complex version. If the 3 minds are mentioned, and they'll come up, and he'll name them with some funny names. One of my all-time favorite is the life of mind is, he calls the hunchback rider on the red wild ass. He's, and physical mind, the word dwarf comes in quite a bit also, if I recall correctly. But we're in Ashwapati's yoga, and all these layers and levels are going to get the veil's going to be rent for them all. That might have been in Kingdoms and Godheads of the Greater Mind. I can't quite remember what canto that's in.
I would just like to say how reassuring I feel when I am again confronted with what Sri Aurobindo did for the world and continues to do, of course. Because it can look rather bleak these days, at least for me, it's not always easy to keep the bigger picture in mind that Sri Aurobindo actually has given to us. And so that here's his one sole ambition lifted up the race. A power worked, but none knew whence it came. The universal strengths were linked with his, filling earth's smallness with their boundless breadths. He drew the energies that transmute an age. Immeasurable by the common look, he made great dreams a mold for coming things, and cast his deeds like bronze to front the years. His walk through time outstripped the human stride. And then that amazing line, lonely his days and splendid like the sun's.
And we need more epic poetry like that too in today's world, where we all feel a bit under the gun somehow.
Yeah.
That is a great line. Some nuggets came to me too earlier, just returned, about life being an error. I've heard Nietzsche say that. He said that without music, life would be a mistake. And so that was his saving grace. And I think that was that was maybe a joke, but there's something of that too. Because with the yoga, right, there's a yoking part. One of the nuances of that meaning brings to mind the ox, brings to mind just the work of it. Like when one yokes oneself to a spiritual path, it's not easy. And there's an aspect of effort, I think, that is a part of it. But it seems, and part of what I think this canto is also saying, is that effort is not enough. That strictly by the self's effort, one doesn't come to the whole realization, the big thing. That effort kind of is a fall. There's a fall and there's an attempt to return, to source. And that's why one has to work for it. But the work, in a way, I think, this might be my interjection, but it's more opening oneself up to the inspiration that comes. And that's, I think, part of even what we need today is to feel a little bit of that sort of grace, because it seems, there's a saying from the recovery, the world of AA and recovery. My best thinking got me here, and it's like for all our work, our results may be quite meager or quite counterproductive without that larger context.
But it gets us there.
It gets us to the place where we can receive it, maybe. I think that's, yeah, that's right. It's not for naught.
Right.
So I'm really appreciating reading this. This is a huge oasis in my week. I've been having just for very personal reasons, stuff to do with house and work and money and life, very stressful weeks. And this is like water in the desert to be able to spend this time with you.
I feel exactly the same way. It's like my oasis.
And I enjoyed reading. I think I learned a lot from reading the second time. So I think the rereading is really important in what we're doing, not just the reading, but the rereading is part of where a lot of the learning happens, or I don't know what it's learning exactly, but imbibing.
I'd really love next time to read this canto straight through, if y'all, to kind of tie it together, because we've spent time discussing. I don't know what other people think. I feel kind of complete for today, but I'd be happy to go on more. But I think to read it straight through, I think we'd have to just do that, and then there would be time for talking afterwards. I think it would only take. My guess is it would take about an hour to read it straight through.
I would love that. I would really love that. This is so rich. We get so much out of it. I get so much out of it.
You know.
And I love it when we read it, because we often don't read the same passages we read the last time. So it's also, it's like I said for the work we were doing with Milton, when we read a section, we're actually reading this out loud for the first time. I mean, maybe some of you have read it before out loud, but for me, it's all new. And reading it aloud is so extraordinary. So
I am all for it. And perhaps if with the extra time, if we have some extra time, we could begin to set up the next canto. So we could look back and look forward, and then come back. I guess it would be the first Wednesday of December, and we'd be going into canto 4.
Mm-hmm.
So
During the third Wednesday of this month?
Yep, first and third.
So the third of this, we'd reread canto 3.
Oh, okay. I missed you for a moment. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, I like your plan, Marco.
Cool. Well,
Should we end with a meditation? Does everyone feel
let's
kind
do
of?
that. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Marco. Is that what you were going to say?
oh, not at all. I wanted to I wanted to say it was our plan. It all just came together. So
Yeah.
I want to say what a joy it is to be with each one of you and with all of us together here. It's really a joy to me. Makes my heart sing.
me too.
Let's
Yeah,
have
the
tea
same.
soon, Andrea. Alejandra is here. We'd love to see you in vivo,
Yes.
and we'll make that. I'll see you. I'll be seeing you Saturday, actually, at the Sunday at the boys event. And just so Jeffrey and Marco know, we're settling on dates for our annual read the whole thing straight through circle. It's not set yet, but it's looking
Yes,
like.
it has been set.
Oh, that's news
It
to
has
me.
been set for the first weekend of May.
Set
It will be
according
May.
set with Dakshina.
Yes.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah, if you two are interested, we begin on Friday at after lunch, Friday at 1 p.m.
Yeah,
and
the first.
continue on till Monday or Tuesday when we finish. With plenty of breaks, and there's a place to stay. You should have your own room, and there's no cost for the event. It just costs to stay, super reasonable to stay at the ashram, including meals. It's like $25 a night. So the whole thing is $100, including food.
So are you two, Marco and Jeffrey, are you on Dakshina's email list?
I
No.
don't think I am. No.
Yeah, it would be. It's not Dakshina. It would be SASP, Sri Aurobindo Sadhana Pitam. You have to actually go there to the webpage and sign up for that mailing list. And maybe that's too much email, but we'll keep you
Could
posted.
you put the link to the site up on the forum, and then I can?
I don't. Do you want me to put it in the? Yeah. I'd like to take care of it now, so it's not something that I have to do. Let me pull that up really quick.
I hope I can make it.
Yeah, and if anyone needs, I'm super happy to arrange if anyone needs a place to lift from the airport, and you can stay at my place beforehand. Of logistics work out. I've got, hopefully I'll still have a guest bedroom. I have a guest bedroom now. Hopefully I'll have a guest bedroom then. Let me post it here. This is not a direct link to sign up for the email list, but that will get you to that'll get you to SASP, where you can browse the web page and find it.
Okay, good.
Yeah, but the first weekend of May, Friday through Monday or Tuesday. And it will be our 9th annual. Yeah. And Andrea will be facilitating, right, Andrea?
I will do my best.
Yeah. Well, we're here to help.
With your help.
Well, you never know. I might be able to come. I mean, I'll have to see, but I know I have something else in May, but I have to see whether it happens. But
it would be great to have you.
Yes. Yeah, to have both of you. The three, John Robert and Andrea and I will be there. Okay. Thank you, John Robert. Yes.
Yeah.
That link that I just posted is the YouTube talk by Debashish Banerjee that I was talking about earlier.
Good. And you need to open it now, because I think everything goes away as soon as we end this meeting.
Okay.
I got it. Very good. And it occurs to me that Debashish would be a great resource on the question of yoga. And this whole book, which I know you have, Jeffrey, right?
Yes, I do have it. Yeah.
Is about that.
Debashish came on to us in the Aurobindo session we did on the Life Divine and gave a talk to us. So we met him online virtually, but we didn't meet him in real life.
It was between parts 1 and part 2. So of Life Divine, he gave kind of came on and gave an hour and 20-minute summary. I think he was in Calcutta at the time, actually.
Yeah.
Before we go, I wanted to clarify something. So, Matteo, earlier there was a point where I was talking and I said Vedantic versus Vedic, and I want to make sure I got those straight. So, Vedic would refer to the ancient Vedas, the old texts, right?
Yeah, and Vedantic refers to the Upanishads.
Okay, specifically the Upanishads.
Yeah,
and the Vedantic philosophy that comes out of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which is myriad, right? There's a whole bunch of religions that came out of Vedanta, because the Upanishads have all these seemingly contradictory cosmologies, right? You can look at the Upanishads and focus on dualistic cosmology, non-dualistic cosmology, what they call qualified monism. There's all this. There's this great little book, brilliant little book, that I don't even know if it's available. It's called Soul Culture in the Upanishad, that details all of this. Super tiny little book by the author is C.R. Goswami. It was his Goswami.
I've heard of him.
Soul Culture in the Upanishads, C.R. Goswami. It was his master's thesis. I gave a copy to John Robert many moons ago. It was his master's thesis from a university in Calgary. It's a brilliant little summary book that kind of helped me to understand what all these different camps were that set up coming out of the Upanishads. And because at the time, Sri Aurobindo writes in this first person format of how he actually did. He came to India thinking what all scholars thought of the Veda, that it was worthless spiritually, that it was mythological at best, and just the ramblings of the ancients. And he talks about his revelation with that basically at the time, I think that the global thinking at the time, meaning 14, when he arrived in Pondicherry, he still hadn't had the Vedic realization yet, and it came strongly, where he's like, wow, there's some real spiritual juice here. Whereas before, all the scholars at the time thought that all the spiritual juice was with the Upanishads, and he kind of flipped that on its head, as he did with a lot of things.
Interesting. So Debashish, he maps Vedanta to, we calls these two yogas, one of liberation and the other of enjoyment. And the Vedanta maps to liberation, and then Tantra maps to enjoyment. And then the Vedic is distinct from both of those because what is the sort of philosophical difference there?
I'm confused. Debashish is a super brain. Debashish is class A intelligence. So I'm just not following the mapping. What I'm hearing is different terms coming from the record of yoga and the Sapta Chatushtraya. If we're talking about enjoyment, equal enjoyment, we're talking about Bogha Rasa, which is part of the Chatushtraya of equality, but I can't link those to Veda or Vedanta or Tantra. I don't. Yeah.
Let me just offer a reference, because I was reading it earlier. That's why it's
okay.
Aren't the Vedas quite a bit older?
Yes, the Veda are old. Vedanta means Vedanta. The meaning of the word is at the end of the Veda. Vedanta, just the word itself. So those were the Upanishads at the end of the Veda.
Okay. So I'll share. Let me read this from Debashish, because I thought it was interesting and provocative.
I'm sorry, I'm needing to step out.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Love you.
Bye.
Love you too, Andre. See you soon.
So this is a bit of a footnote to our talk and reading. This is a section called The True Traditions on page 45 of the 7 Quartets of Becoming. And he writes, Debashish writes, in world traditions, there are 2 major paths that have developed along these 2 lines. Okay, well, we have to come back to what the 2 lines are. But one is spirituality, the movement towards liberation, the seeking for a consciousness which does not need anything for its existence. And the other is technology, the attempt to control and master visible and invisible forces, and thus enjoy the world around us. In the Indian tradition, these 2 primordial drives find 2 theories of practice, very early philosophies that have persisted. One can say that they are not exclusive to each other. These 2 drives are in perpetual dialectical relationship. One of them is the field of Vedanta, leading towards liberation. The other is Tantra, leading toward the exploration and maximization of power and enjoyment in the world. And then the paragraph completes, each of these blends of elements of the other into itself. Each of these blends elements of the other into itself. In terms of integral transformation, Sri Aurobindo tells us that both these goals of liberation and enjoyment are necessary to an integral perfection, that, in fact, the condition of a perfect enjoyment is a perfect liberation. So that's kind of what I'm trying to work out in my mind, because I thought it was really interesting to see technology, Tantra as a kind of form of technology, because it's engaging with the material world, whereas Vedanta's liberation from the material world, and then those 2 together are the yin and yang, if you will, of the complete yoga. But I wasn't sure what the relation is between Veda and Vedanta, other than them being historically a little bit, different in time, as far as the actual philosophy, because Aurobindo goes back to the Vedas for these sources of inspiration, which he then weaves into a more universal or transcultural expression, and then there's also the mythological aspects of the Vedas, which like you were bringing into the discussion today, how the particular, let's say universal kinds of aspects and forces map to the beings, the gods and goddesses of that work.
God, there's layers upon layers here, Marco. The
Yeah, I know.
first thing, and Sri Aurobindo actually has to walk us through all with revealing the secret of the Veda. The Indian mind that grows up culturally with all this stuff has a lot of struggles that I don't understand because I've come into it from Sri Aurobindo's perspective. But he's also going through this process of kind of correcting cultural understandings or putting light on cultural understandings of who these gods and goddesses are and what they represent. And I don't have any basis for that. I really don't understand it culturally because I'm not Indian and I wasn't raised with Hinduism in my life. So anyway, and then also what you're reading, the paragraph from Debashish, reminds me of why people call integral yoga a double tantric path, like ascending and descending. But Debashish, that paragraph that you read is like beyond me right now. I'd love to chat. I could facilitate a chat with Debashish. John Robert, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I could say a little bit about that. I'm not very knowledgeable about it, but in general, the way I understand it is the Veda is from a kind of a mythological age of mind. So the philosophy that comes out of that is Vedanta. Now, Tantra may come out of it too, I don't know. But the Vedic time is not a philosophical time. It's more of a mythic time when this of the day told stories. And they had experiences around those stories. Whereas when you get to the time of the Upanishads, it's more of a philosophical time when human reason is coming more and kind of growing in its importance in the evolution of the species. And so you have like philosophical commentary. And I'm sure that's really a simplistic way of looking at it, but that's my understanding of it.
That's very helpful, though. In Jean Gebser's terms, this is the difference between the mythic structure of consciousness and the mental structure of consciousness. Yeah. And now that I'm thinking about it, I recall that the Upanishads that I've read focus on the self, focus on Atman, and they've abstracted these very philosophical concepts, and then there's a teaching around those. Whereas what I've read of the Vedas is, like you say, a lot more mythological, which is not to say that they don't contain insight or wisdom or the same, clarity of awakening or truth, but that it's told in narrative terms with gods and goddesses and things like that. So anyway, I didn't mean to go so far over time, but I got this last wind, I guess, of curiosity.
I can see my reading is going to be cut out for me if I'm going to read the Vedas, the Upanishads, and
and the early tantric texts, all the Sir John Woodruff expositions on Hindu Sanskrit texts, etc., etc. Where do we stop? There's no. It's always just a long beginning.
I think somewhere Debashish in that book says that Sri Aurobindo's intentions with yoga were power and enjoyment. Power and enjoyment. And his original purpose of going to a yogi was to help with the liberation of India. So he was a politician at that time. And he was looking to a yogi to help him move forward in that. And then, of course, once he had this experience of nirvana over the period of 3 days, and it blew his mind, really.
But that was the liberation part, right? That was the, because he didn't even want to get up on stage,
right?
And I think his guru said, "We'll just go up and it'll come," right? And
that's right.
This is, I think, a story you shared, Matteo, while we were reading Life Divine. So it's very interesting. I'm glad to be able to touch in with it again, and to have this, this ritual that we've been doing.
I love it that Sri Aurobindo's part of his purpose in yoga is enjoyment. I mean, bliss, Ananda, is one of the names of the divine, and so Sri Aurobindo brings that full in.
It's very life positive in that way.
Yeah.
And Savitri is all about pleasure, reading it anyway.
Yeah. And the voice. I think part of where the pleasure comes from is that it resonates in our flesh. It resonates in our bones. Each of your voices brings a certain quality of enjoyment, I think, to the text. And then reading it myself, it's almost like it absorbs into the cells. It absorbs into the body through the repetition and through the reading, which feels good, actually, when it gets in there. It's like water to parched soil. It's very, very good. So, all right.
The soil and the soul.
That's right. That's right. All right. I think I'm complete.
Shall we do a meditation to finish up then? I don't think we did it, right? So.
Happy to chime in.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
friends.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure being with you.
Likewise. Bye-bye.
See you soon.
Yes.